Thank you to everyone for joining. Just sort of a bit of housekeeping. So this webinar will be about half an hour, which is 20 minutes of me talking, and then 10 minutes for any questions. If you've got any questions, put them in the chat, and then I'll catch them at the end. The slides are available in the handout, and there's also another handout which is by some really great colleagues of mine, which is about designing for neurodiversity. So it's really similar to the vein and the themes that we're going to be talking about here. So welcome to this afternoon or morning or evening or whatever time you're listening to its webinar. It is using behavioural science and human-centred design in transport and beyond. And really those terms are slightly interchangeable, even though they've got specific meanings, but it's just about designing things that people actually want to use. So a bit about me. So I've had a few careers before coming to transport. I worked in international development, worked in organizational psychology. I even had a stint at the British Potato Council, who aren't a thing anymore. But I came to transport through working in the UK Department for Transport's Social and Behavioural Research Team. That was a new team set up a few years ago now, but they were looking at understanding why people traveled the way they did and what they could do to sort of influence that and improve transport provision for people. Following that, I joined the Future Mobility team here in the Team Transport in London just over a couple of years ago. And the work I do, which I'll come on to in a bit, focuses on anything that has a human element to it. On a sort of more flippant note, I'm also the poster boy for a chain of burrito restaurants, which is quite exciting. So if you're in Oxford, you can go and see my face on the wall. And some people say that's not me, but I promise you that is me in the bottom left there. So the agenda today is an introduction, which I've already done. I'll cover what is behavioural science and why do we need it, an introduction to the future mobility behavioural design model, go through some example case studies, and then at the end there's some time for questions and answers. So as I said, just put them in the chat and we'll get to them in a bit. So the first thing is, what is behavioural science and why do we need it? Behavioral science is a discipline that kind of sits at the heart of psychology, economics, sociology. You could even throw anthropology in there. There are all of these distinct areas of study, but actually none of them quite understand humans, and that's where behavioral science comes in. It pulls together all the best parts of these. You might have heard of Homo economicus from the book Nudge, and how that person doesn't necessarily act always with the best interest at heart, and actually it's about understanding what it is that's really driving those decision makings, and the founding of behavioral science pulled from all of these different areas, and looking at why people made the decisions that they did, rather than just assuming that people were rational or people were incredibly rational economic beings. And the reason for that is because, you know, people are a bit confused and muddled. And this quote from David Ogilvy, people are messy. They don't always think what they feel, say what they think, and do what they say, really sums it up. When we do work with end users and stakeholders, you know, you often find that the answers they're giving aren't necessarily what you thought they would. And when people behave, they don't behave in the way they said they were going to do. So this is an industry that's all, and a field that's all about understanding the reasons for that. And the main reason for that really is that, like in nature, people follow the path of least resistance. They just do what's easiest, and they do what comes naturally to them, and they just try and, you know, follow the easy route. So for example, as a bit of a game, here's a missing letter. What's that missing letter? Now, it's relatively straightforward, it's relatively easy, but actually if we just change the context, what that letter might appear to you, and that question being really simple, it really changes. And that's what we want to look at as behavioral scientists, is how context and how our surroundings and how our behaviors are impacted by what we're doing. And we found that actually, you know, as transport planners and engineers, this understanding of what humans do isn't always understood and isn't always accounted for in in engineering projects. So take, for example, the Millennium Bridge in London. So this was opened in, unsurprisingly, in 2000. And what they found when they opened it was there was people walking across, big crowds of people walking across. And with all these people walking across, they fell into lockstep with each other. The bridge started swaying, which caused more people to fall into lockstep, and that it exacerbated the swaying and it made it worse. And actually, this effect has been known about for centuries. There are signs on other, or there were signs on other bridges in London requesting troops to not march in lockstep when going over a bridge. But actually, the designers of the bridge didn't consider the fact that you would have thousands of people walking together, and how that impact and that context of actually people walking together would affect things. And so this is the sort of problem that we're looking to solve with behavioral design. It's how do people actually act and how do people actually behave in a particular context, rather than just going with the models or going with what people have done previously. So we've considered a model of behavioral design, and now, whilst this is about transport, we're specifically looking at other things, and it's applicable to more than just transport. And there are 4 stages to it. Like all good models, there's a good 4-stage model: discover, diagnose, develop, and deliver. But that's not particularly interesting. All too often, we as professionals in this field, we rely on our models and we rely on the things that we fall back on. So actually, what's really important in behavioral design is to tell the story about what we're doing. It's not just about giving models and giving facts and figures. We actually need to tell a story to bring people along with us, and that's what we're really trying to do with behavioral design. It's about helping people to understand why people behave the way they do. So the first stage in the model, discover, there's all sorts of things we want to know. So we want to understand what people already think, what information is already out there. So we can conduct literature reviews, we can conduct stakeholder engagement, and beyond the literature reviews, there's rapid evidence reviews, there's deep dives. We use a couple of behavioral models to really understand and get under the skin of what studies are looking at. And we do that because actually other people have researched this. So why can't we use other research that people have done? We also do stakeholder engagement. So we go out and we speak to people. We do surveys. We do focus groups. We do them in person, online. And actually, one of the benefits of COVID was the shift to doing things online allowed us to experiment with different ways of engaging with people. So we've done lots of situational stuff where we take people through sort of the steps of a journey. And whilst this is all really interesting, and maybe to us as professionals in this field, it makes sense. Actually, to a lot of people that we talk about as designers and engineers and transport planners and urban planners, it doesn't really help that much because it doesn't really tell that story. And the story we've got to tell through other tools. So with that information, we can develop personas, for example. So if anyone joined the call a few weeks ago, their personas are more illustrative than traditional segments. So take, for example, on this slide here, Callum at the front, he might be deemed in the UK as a NEET, so someone who's not in employment, education or training. But that doesn't really tell us about his hopes and his aspirations. And so building these personas and understanding who these people are, what they want, it gives us a much better understanding of how they might behave in a certain situation. We can also build journey mapping from that stakeholder engagement and from the literature review. Where do people go? Why do people go there? How do they feel when they're going there? And actually, again, this really helps to sort of just illustrate the point of people don't just travel from A to B for the sake of traveling from A to B. They travel for a reason. They travel for a purpose. And, they've got high points and low points of doing that. And we draw from lots of psychology models to understand, what people are going through, where they're doing that. But that journey mapping, again, really helps just to illustrate what people are doing and why people are doing it. Then we've got systems mapping. So actually, we can put all this stuff that we've understood from the stakeholder engagement and working with clients to say, what are the impacts on the individual? Do we really consider enough in the work that we do how the knock-on effect of, closing a particular bus route or a different government policy is going to impact on an individual? And I don't think we do. I don't think we've done enough. And systems mapping is becoming really popular now of a great way of assessing who people are, where people are, and what has an effect on them. The next stage of the model is diagnose. Now, in diagnose, we've got a couple of psychology models here. So again, we've got COM-B, which is about capabilities, opportunities, and motivations and how they affect your behaviors, and another one called the trans-theoretical model of behavioral change. But I mean, you can Google those, but we get those through focus groups, through workshops, and through brainstorming to really diagnose what is the behavior at the back of this. What are we really trying to understand? And when we're considering how a cycle lane might impact on someone, do we consider whether someone can actually get to the cycle lane, whether someone has a bike, whether someone knows how to ride a bike? And that's what we do to diagnose the problem. And again, the story behind this is pain points or frustrations that people have. Do we know, when someone's on their way to work, what is it that upsets them about their journey? What is it about the bus or driving or the traffic or the parking? And often we don't really consider these as individual elements. We just think our frustration with driving. And we also think about the organizations, thinking about the stakeholders, the organizations. What is it about the organization that affects this? So an organization isn't just a sort of homogenous person. It's a group of people. It's people who think about parking, people who think about HR. It's, how are people getting to work? And it's understanding those questions, which really leads us to the key issue, which is, what behavior are we trying to change? And too often in behavior change and design, we don't really think about the specific behavior that we're trying to change. We just say, we want people to cycle to work, or we want people to use public transport. But we don't consider all those things that go into someone's decision to not use those. And actually, maybe the behavior is that people don't understand about when the buses come, or they don't understand any of the other factors. So actually, that's what we need to understand. What is it that's the barrier to change? And so we've got, again, a range of tools, and there's all sorts of models to do this, but I think, and we use all sorts, but the best two, I think, are EAST and the customer value propositions. EAST is a really nice tool designed by the Behavioural Insights team here in the UK, but actually all the solutions need to be easy, attractive, social, so it's got to be something that you want to do and that people don't judge you for, and timely. So that intervention has got to be there for you at the right time. And we work through these solutions iteratively. So actually, we don't just design something and chuck it out there. We go back to the stakeholders, we go back to the focus groups, we go back to our team, we go back to clients, and actually we work through these to understand, what is a really nice solution to this. And so again, we've got a way of telling these stories through things like vision concepts. So this is mock-ups of a couple of mobility hubs, and this work has really covered everything from inclusivity and accessibility. So we need to make sure that when we're designing mobility hubs or simple bus stops or bike racks, that actually they have everyone who might use them, from the individual who is going to use the bus or the bike to the people who might be coming past it. And that's again where we get to the stakeholder mapping. It's understanding, have we catered for the fact that someone might have a vision impairment and would be walking past it? Have we catered for the fact that someone might not be able to ride a bike? What can we do to ensure that we've covered all of those when we're starting to plan these maps? And then we have value propositions. So this is more when we're developing a new service. What is it about a service that actually people want to do? Now, you can put in an e-bike rental, you can put in scooters, you can put in a new bike lane, but actually, if there's no value to an individual, then it's not going to work. So you really need to get under the skin and design these value propositions to make sure the service that you're providing really answers a need for the individual. And then we have a variety of mapping, actually. There's no point putting a bike scheme in the middle of nowhere where no one lives. We need to understand who lives in an area and design schemes around the type of people who might be about to use them. So we've got all sorts of mapping tools, and there's really great ways of working with that. And lastly, we've got to deliver this. And there are a variety of ways we can deliver this. We can do pilots, we can do testing, we can do trials, we can publish strategies and policies. Now, rather than go through models for these, I'll take you through a number of case studies where we've really done this and we've dug under the skin of the problems. So here, are some case studies. So rural mobility. So what we wanted to do was understand how people traveled and how people interacted with mobility. In the UK in particular, rural areas are generally slightly poorer. They have definitely got worse public transport connections. The infrastructure isn't as good. So actually, how can we develop schemes where there's quite tight budget to ensure that people's needs are met? So rather than just build bigger roads, chuck on loads of extra buses, what do people really want from their mobility? And can we go out and speak to people and understand how people are living and how people are traveling and how people feel about what is around them? We've also done work on understanding users of shared mobility. So, for example, in Scotland, there's bike share schemes in Glasgow, but there aren't bike share schemes in Edinburgh. And when doing focus groups and you speak to people, the people in Edinburgh say, actually, you can't because the weather is too bad here, so it's not going to work. Whereas you speak to people in Glasgow where there is a scheme and they say it's absolutely fine. There's no reason why you can't cycle, but it's different things that are driving it. So particularly in Edinburgh, the topography, if you've been, it's quite a hilly city. So actually cycling on its own there is quite a difficult thing to do. But also we looked into it and we discovered that poverty, people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are less likely to use shared mobility because they don't really understand the costs. And so as a result, we need to develop schemes which can address that. And here was a really interesting project where we used a lot of mosaic analysis to understand the issues. We did a combi analysis to understand what really was behind the behaviour, and then developed an action plan. That work was actually featured in the Daily Record in Scotland. We've also done it for cargo bikes, so e-cargo bikes. So a real great project led by a colleague of mine, Lawrence Penn, in the west of England, has replaced vans with e-cargo bikes. So for the NHS and for universities, where they've been driving vans around, actually, can they replace those with e-cargo bikes, these little small four-wheelers, electric assisted? And actually on that map on below, we can see that people aren't going far. So something like this is a really great solution. It's a really cheap solution to a really pertinent problem. And actually, because of these, they can go a bit faster. But it's not all about specific transport. So actually, we can apply this in other fields. So for example, with air quality. So we've done a project with the air quality team here at WSP, where we looked at where there were air quality issues in a part of the UK in the southeast. Where is there air quality? Is it poorer, and looking at how we can prevent cars from idling. So we know that cars are only going to be stopped still for a relatively short time, but actually how can we prevent them from doing that and emissions? We pulled together some creative, and that was thanks to the team in Transport Planning North here. And actually, we got those signs out, and so far the trials have been quite small scale, but the results look really positive. That these simple call to actions are doing a good job at preventing idling. We've also used the same models for housing development. So traditionally, mobility planning is based on predict and provide, which looks at what people have always done, and that provides a sort of a proxy for what people will do in the future. However, that doesn't really account for how you can affect the trips and how you can affect people's journeys by developing something that might change that. So changing the attitudes and the development of an area might well see people changing how they travel. And so that's a really important one as we move towards urban developments which don't necessarily have parking spaces. And lastly, on a slightly more somber note, actually, we can do this, it's all well and good to talk about, fun transport things and cargo bikes, but actually it's the same model for us to do suicide prevention work. So we're currently working with a client to how can we prevent suicides on the roads? And we're following the same process. We're trying to understand what the problem is, and we're trying to diagnose what the specific behaviors are. And it's lots of people on the project to start with think actually it's just about making sure people can't get onto bridges, but there's so much more to it, and it's really important piece of work for us to be able to understand what are the drivers of behavior and how we can do stuff to influence it before it becomes a problem. So my key takeaways from here, that went a lot faster than I was expecting. People rarely behave the way we think they're going to. So just make sure that when you think you know what someone's going to do, chances are they probably aren't going to do it that way. Context is key. How our environment is built around us shapes our decision to do things, especially the people around us. We like to follow what others are doing. When considering behavior change, you need to focus on a specific behavior you're trying to change. It's no good designing something that just addresses all behavior. You want to really focus on individual aspects of behavior because that's much easier to change. There are loads of models out there. We could go on about this and this industry and engineering and planning. We've got loads of models and charts and stats. But the most important thing is to tell a story. That's where the crux is, and that's where you can really get buy-in. And then lastly, this behavioral design, it can have a role in all projects. So it doesn't necessarily need to be, specific module, but actually, if we can embed this decision-making and this thought process into our work, we can make it that much more efficient, and we can, design much nicer projects. So thank you all for joining me wherever you are at whatever time it is. I will open the floor to questions now.
Thank you, James, for a fantastic presentation. Just mentioning quickly the housekeeping items. In the handout box on the GoToWebinar control panel, you can find two attachments. One of them is the presentation slides and also the recently launched white paper on designing for neurodiversity by two of WSP in the UK colleagues, Sarah Taylor and David Salmons. And also, please continue to log your questions in the question box again on the GoToWebinar control panel. I will start with the first question. You mentioned some tools here in this presentation. Aren't these tools already built in our legislation and standards for transportation design?
Yeah, that's a good question. And sadly, they're not. At least in the UK, other countries might be slightly ahead of us. What we often find in the UK is the standards and legislation is to cover off the minimum viable product, really, to ensure that equalities issues are met, but we don't really design. We design them, and the legislation is about sort of satisfying a need rather than maximizing our possible benefit, and that's what we have to do. And when we get to really the nub of the issue is these sorts of things fall away because it's an expense, and actually the big engineering thing is the thing that needs to cost money. So we don't often follow through with it, and we just try and get by with as little as possible.
Thank you. From your experience, are clients interested in this kind of work?
Yes. It's a really growing area. Lots of clients are interested in it. We've had a load of really productive projects on it. However, you just need to be careful that we embed it into work from the start. I think it's much harder to do it with clients, once the project's already started. So yeah, people are really interested in it, and we're doing as much as we can to sort of do it more, really.
Thank you. The next question is, how do you reconcile or integrate behavioral science research into the more traditional and technical approaches to design?
Well, as I said, we want to get behavioral science in at the start, and we want to get that influence in to help direct the project. And absolutely, I'm not suggesting that behavioral scientists can design a bridge. It's just about understanding what the goals of the bridge are and working with traditional, engineers and those technical approaches to come up with something that's kind of that's sort of a perfect amalgam of the two different sort of disciplines, really. So it's just working with people from the start, and actually it's telling that story. Why are we suggesting these changes to the way things have been done? And it's actually because we can make them better. That bridge is great, but how can we make it even better?
Thank you. How do you, do you need additional budget to implement behavioral design work, and how much does it cost?
Um, not Not usually. There is a cost to it, but it's not a particularly expensive thing. I think, we're talking about people's time rather than anything sort of any capital costs. And it's in the grand scheme of projects, it's quite a small part of the cost of a big piece of work. So it does cost money, but it's sort of a nice way to ensure that a project is more successful. It's a good investment in a piece of work to ensure that it's more successful, because it's really focusing on the people that we're looking at, rather than just taking a traditional sort of engineering or planning led approach.
Thank you. How can we design cities around the change in number of commuters?
It's a really good question, and I think we don't really know what's going on with the post-COVID world. We know that transport and commuting is pretty much back to normal on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, but Mondays and Fridays it's different. I think it's letting things settle down and then actually working out what people want from their cities. We know that the 9 to 5 is largely sort of the traditional commuting pattern of 9 to 5 Monday to Friday is not a thing of the past, because 50% of people still do it. But actually, because of that change, how do people want to travel in? Do people want to travel in later? Do they want to travel in earlier? And can we design mobility to be more experiential? So actually, if you can catch your train and you can do work on the train, do we need to worry about people being stood up? And can we make sure that people have a much nicer journey, and input and impact how they enjoy getting to work and extend their day that way?
Thank you. I will take the last question. Do you use agile methods to deliver this kind of work, and is that process designed early on?
We do use agile methods. It depends on the project, to be honest, and depends on the clients and the project team and how actually the project's set up. I like to think of the behavioral design as it's something to go with things, rather than necessarily something that's completely separate. We work with project teams, we work with clients to fit into what's going on. And the process, I think, should be designed early on. We should start as soon as possible. So with the behavioral side of things, I feel there needs to be a big input at the start for us to understand what the question is, and as I say, what the behavior that we're looking to change. And then we only need to think about tinkering as we go along, just to ensure that the project kind of stays on track from a behavioral point of view. And then actually the finessing of a project at the end, the finessing of whatever intervention or solution we're designing, and actually, have we got this right? If you just try and do it at the end, it doesn't necessarily work. If you just try and do it at the beginning, it doesn't necessarily work. But yeah, as long as this process is embedded early on, then it has the best chance of delivering.
Fantastic. Thank you, James, for this fantastic presentation, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you for submitting the questions, and any outstanding questions will be followed up directly by James. So you can still follow up with James via the contact details shown on the screen. And thanks again, everyone. We will wrap up the session now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.